Medieval people slept peacefully through blizzards in unheated stone rooms that were colder than modern refrigerators. There are 7 survival methods that kept them from becoming ice sculptures overnight. Ever wondered how medieval castle dwellers survived freezing winters without central heating? The answer lies in those massive stone hearths that dominated every major room. These weren't just pretty focal points. They were sophisticated heating systems that could warm an entire space for half a day. Picture a fireplace so large you could literally walk inside it. That's what we're talking about here. Castle hearths were built from thick stone blocks that absorbed heat like giant batteries. While the fire blazed, these stones soaked up every bit of warmth, storing it deep within their mass. The brilliant part? They'd keep radiating that heat for up to 12 hours after the flames died out. But here's where medieval engineers got creative. They didn't just build fireplaces, they built entire heating networks around them. Stone benches were positioned strategically near the hearth, allowing people to sit directly on warm surfaces. Some castles even had heated stone walls, where the fireplace would warm massive sections of masonry that stayed toasty throughout the night. The smoke from these fires wasn't just a byproduct either. It served a dual purpose that modern folks rarely consider. Sure, it drifted out slowly through carefully designed flues, but along the way, it helped keep bugs and pests at bay. Medieval people discovered that a slightly smoky room meant fewer unwanted critters sharing their living space. Smart, right? Then there's the matter of fuel efficiency. These stone hearths were designed to burn wood slowly and steadily, maximizing every log's heating potential. The stones would absorb heat gradually during the day when fires burned brightest, then release it evenly as temperatures dropped. This meant castle inhabitants could maintain comfortable temperatures without constantly feeding massive amounts of wood into the flames. What's really fascinating is how they positioned these hearths within the castle's layout. The largest ones sat at the heart of great halls, where their warmth could reach the maximum number of people. Smaller hearths in private chambers were often built into corners where 2 thick walls met, allowing the stone to radiate heat in multiple directions. The wealthy took this concept even further. Some castle hearths featured intricate stone channels that directed warm air along specific paths, almost like primitive ductwork. These systems could maintain comfortable temperatures in rooms far from the actual fire source. And the weird part is, many of these medieval heating solutions were more sustainable than what we use today. No electricity, no gas bills, just carefully managed wood fires and clever stone engineering that worked with natural physics rather than against it. Of course, even the most sophisticated hearth system had its limitations during the harshest winter months. That's when castle builders had to get even more creative with their heating solutions, including some underground methods that would make modern engineers jealous. So those massive fireplaces were great, but what if you wanted to feel like absolute royalty? Enter the Hippocos system, basically medieval underfloor heating that would make your modern heated bathroom tiles weep with envy. Here's how this genius contraption worked. Hot air got pushed through special channels built right under the floor. We're talking about a network of brick and tile passages that turned your room into a giant warm from below paradise. The engineering was surprisingly sophisticated. Romans had perfected this centuries earlier, and some clever castle builders decided to bring back the magic. But let's get real about the numbers. A hypocauste could actually raise room temperatures to around 70 degrees Celsius, which sounds modest until you remember that most medieval folks were thrilled if they could see their breath indoors for only half the day. That's luxury-level warmth by medieval standards. Your toes would actually feel toasty instead of turning into frozen stumps. The catch? Time and money, lots of both. Heating up an average room took about 6 hours because you're essentially warming an entire underground maze before any heat reaches your actual living space. Think of it like preheating the world's most complicated oven, except the oven is under your feet. And the weird part is how exclusive this whole setup was. Only the wealthiest castles could afford hippocausts because each room needed over 4,000 specially made bricks and tiles. That's not a weekend DIY project. That's hiring an army of skilled craftsmen and probably going into serious debt. Most castle owners looked at the price tag and decided that shivering wasn't so bad after all. Then, there's the maintenance nightmare. These systems needed round-the-clock attention, meaning you had to employ dedicated staff whose only job was keeping the fires burning day and night. Makes sense, right? If the fire dies, your expensive heating system becomes the world's most elaborate basement decoration. These workers basically lived in the underground furnace areas, constantly feeding flames and monitoring airflow. The really fascinating detail? The hot air didn't just randomly float around, it followed carefully designed paths that engineers had mapped out tile by tile. Get one section wrong, and half your castle stays freezing while the other half becomes unbearably stuffy. Most castle dwellers never experienced this kind of warmth, but those lucky enough to walk on heated floors probably felt like they were living in some kind of magical realm where winter couldn't touch them. But even the fanciest hippocaust couldn't solve every cold problem. The real battle against medieval winter happened in the architecture itself. Thick walls and strategic design choices that trapped every precious degree of warmth inside those stone fortresses. So you've got your roaring hearth and maybe even a fancy hippocaust system if you're lucky. But what happens when that fire dies down? Well, medieval castle builders had a brilliant backup plan that didn't involve any fuel at all. Those massive stone walls weren't just for keeping enemies out, they were basically giant thermal batteries. We're talking walls over 6 feet thick in many cases. During the day, these enormous stone barriers would soak up every bit of warmth from sunlight, fires, and even body heat from people moving around. Then, like the world's slowest space heater, they'd release that stored warmth throughout the night. But here's where it gets clever. Castle architects weren't stupid. They knew that big windows meant big problems when winter hit. Those tiny, narrow window slits you see in castles, they weren't just for shooting arrows through. They were designed to let in light while keeping out the brutal wind that could turn a warm room into an icebox in minutes. When evening arrived, heavy wooden shutters would slam shut over those windows. These weren't flimsy things either. We're talking thick, solid wood that could block out every draft. The wealthy folks even had iron reinforcements on their shutters, which helped seal out the cold even better. Then there's the textile game. Rich families would hang massive tapestries along their walls. And this wasn't just for decoration. Those heavy woven hangings created an insulation layer between the living space and the cold stone. Think of it like medieval bubble wrap, except way more expensive and featuring hunting scenes or family crests. The really smart castle designers placed the main bedrooms deep inside the structure, far away from those freezing outer walls. Why suffer through a night with your bed pressed against stone that's been getting hammered by winter wind all day? Better to tuck those sleeping quarters into the castle's warm center, surrounded by multiple layers of protective walls. And the weird part is, this layered approach actually worked incredibly well. A properly designed castle interior could maintain a comfortable temperature even when it was brutally cold outside. The thick walls, tiny windows, and heavy coverings created what was basically a medieval thermos bottle. Heat went in easy, but getting out was nearly impossible. Of course, all this insulation came with trade-offs. These places could get pretty stuffy, and fresh air was basically a summer luxury. But when you're facing months of freezing temperatures, a little stuffiness beats turning into a human popsicle. Speaking of staying warm through those long winter nights, trapping heat inside the castle was only half the battle. The real challenge came when it was time to crawl into bed. When your bed is basically a sheet of fabric stretched over wooden planks sitting on freezing stone floors, you need every trick in the book to survive winter nights. Medieval castle dwellers became absolute masters at layering, and we're talking about levels that would make modern outdoor enthusiasts jealous. Wool blankets formed the foundation of their sleep survival system. But not just one measly blanket. We're talking 3, 4, sometimes 5 thick wool coverings stacked on top of each other. The wealthy? They'd pile on fur throws from bears, wolves, and whatever else they could hunt down. These weren't decorative pieces. They were literal lifesavers when temperatures dropped below freezing inside the castle walls. Then there's the genius of feather-stuffed coverings. Castle residents discovered that duck and goose down trapped air like nobody's business, creating insulation that kept body heat locked in all night long. The really clever families would stuff massive quilts with layers of feathers so thick you'd practically sink into them. But here's where it gets interesting. The mattress situation. Sleeping directly on stone floors meant certain death from cold, so thick straw mattresses became essential. These weren't the thin, sad excuses for bedding you might imagine. Castle dwellers would stuff enormous cloth sacks with fresh straw. sometimes adding layers of wool or even more feathers on top. The result? A barrier between your body and those heat-sucking stone floors that could mean the difference between waking up refreshed or waking up frozen solid. The real game changer was hanging thick curtains around the entire bed. These weren't flimsy decorative drapes. They were heavy, dense fabrics that created a mini room within the bedroom. Once you pulled those curtains closed, your body heat had nowhere to escape. The space became a warm cocoon that stayed comfortable even when the main room felt like an icebox. Smart castle families position these bed curtains to block drafts from doorways and windows too. Cold air loves to sneak through every crack and crevice, but heavy curtains stop those icy breezes dead in their tracks. The curtains also created privacy, which was pretty valuable when you're sharing living spaces with dozens of other people. The wealthiest families took this layering concept to absolutely ridiculous extremes. Historical records show some nobles had dozens of blankets stacked together during the worst winter months. Makes sense, right? When your alternative is literally freezing to death, you pile on every warm thing you can find. What's fascinating is how these layering techniques actually worked better than a lot of modern heating systems. The combination of thick mattresses, multiple wool blankets, fur throws, feather quilts, and enclosed curtains created a microclimate that could stay warm for hours using nothing but body heat. But even the most elaborate bedding setup had its limits on the coldest nights. That's when castle dwellers needed something extra, something that could actually add heat instead of just trapping it. While layering blankets helped trap body heat, smart castle dwellers knew they needed something more powerful to battle those bone-chilling medieval nights. Enter the bed warmer, a brilliant contraption that looked like a long-handled frying pan with a lid. These metal devices were filled with glowing hot coals from the hearth and carefully slid between the sheets about 30 minutes before bedtime. The process was almost ceremonial. Kitchen staff would scoop red-hot embers into the warmer, snap the lid shut, and glide it back and forth across the mattress like they were ironing the bed itself. The metal distributed heat evenly, transforming icy sheets into something resembling paradise. But here's where things got tricky. Leave that thing in there too long and you'd wake up to scorch marks or, worse, a genuine fire hazard. Then there's the stone method, which was arguably even more effective. Castle kitchens would heat large stones or bricks directly in the cooking fires until they were almost too hot to handle. These weren't just any rocks. They chose dense stones that held heat like tiny furnaces. Wrapped carefully in thick cloth or leather, these heated treasures were tucked into beds where they'd radiate warmth for hours. What made heated stones superior? They stayed warm longer than metal bed warmers, sometimes keeping feet toasty until dawn. Plus, no risk of burning fabric since the cloth wrapping provided perfect insulation. Castle kitchens became nightly production lines, preparing these portable heat sources especially for children, elderly family members, or anyone battling illness. The weird part is how precise this whole operation had to be. Too hot and someone got burned, too cool and the effort was wasted. Experienced servants developed an almost supernatural ability to judge the perfect temperature just by holding their hand near the wrapped stone. They tested against their own cheek first, a medieval quality control system that actually worked. Some castles got creative with their heating stones. They'd use special flat bricks that fit perfectly at the foot of beds, or round river stones that nestled perfectly against someone's back. The wealthy sometimes had custom-made stone warmers carved to specific shapes, designed to heat different parts of the body. But the real genius wasn't just in the stones themselves, it was in the timing. Kitchen staff coordinated these nightly preparations like clockwork, ensuring every bed was pre-warmed before the family retired. Children learned to treasure their heated stones, sometimes clutching them like teddy bears throughout the night. Makes sense, right? When you're dealing with stone walls that feel like ice blocks, you need every advantage you can get. Yet even with perfectly warm beds, medieval folks discovered another heat source that cost nothing and worked all night long: each other. Medieval castle life had one unspoken rule when winter hit. Nobody sleeps alone if they can help it. Body heat was precious currency, and wasting it on an empty bed made about as much sense as throwing gold coins into the moat. Entire families piled into single beds like medieval sardines. Parents, children, grandparents, everyone squeezed together under those heavy wool blankets we talked about earlier. The biggest beds might fit 4 or 5 people comfortably, but comfort wasn't really the goal here. Survival was. Servants had their own clever arrangement. They'd sleep in corners of their master's bedroom, curled up on thick straw mats. Some even slept right at the foot of the Lord's bed, which sounds awkward, but made perfect sense. The master's room usually had the best fireplace, and sleeping near wealthy people meant you got some of that residual warmth from their fancy bedding. Here's where it gets interesting, though. Children were basically human hot water bottles, passed around to whoever needed extra warmth that night. A shivering grandmother might have 2 or 3 grandkids tucked around her. An elderly servant recovering from illness could find himself surrounded by younger workers sharing their body heat. The weird part is how normal this all was. Privacy wasn't really a medieval concept anyway, so sleeping in groups felt natural. People worked together, ate together, and definitely slept together when the temperature dropped. Makes sense, right? Then there were the really desperate nights when even human warmth wasn't enough. Families would bring their dogs into bed. Not just small lap dogs either. We're talking about working dogs, hunting hounds, whatever 4-legged creature could generate heat. These animals were already living inside the castle anyway, so why not put them to work as living blankets? Some castle communities took this sharing system to extremes. Entire households might abandon their individual sleeping spaces and create one massive sleeping area in the warmest room. Everyone from the kitchen staff to the guards would pile together in the great hall, closest to that massive stone hearth still radiating heat from the day's fire. Well, this arrangement had unexpected benefits beyond just warmth. Shared sleeping meant shared security too. If enemies attacked at night, you had plenty of people ready to wake up and defend the castle. Plus, with everyone together, nobody wandered off and froze to death in some forgotten corridor. But even with all this creative bed sharing, people still got cold. Hands and feet went numb despite being surrounded by other warm bodies. That's when medieval folks had to get really creative with what they actually wore to bed, because sometimes even a pile of people wasn't quite enough to keep Jack Frost away. Getting dressed for bed in medieval times wasn't exactly slipping into silk pajamas. People layered up like they were heading into battle against the cold. Woolen nightcaps weren't just fashion statements, they prevented precious body heat from escaping through the head. Think about it. You lose a ton of warmth through your scalp, and medieval folks figured this out long before modern science proved it right. Thick socks made from sheep's wool covered feet that would otherwise freeze solid on stone floors. But here's where it gets creative. Many people wrapped their hands and feet in extra cloths, creating makeshift sleeping pockets that worked like mini sleeping bags for extremities. Smart? Absolutely. Glamorous? Not so much. Padded gowns were the real game changer, though. These weren't thin nightgowns we know today. We're talking about thick, quilted robes that added serious insulation. The wealthy had gowns stuffed with feathers or down, while common folk made do with layers of rough wool and linen. Then there's the animal situation. Yeah, you heard that right. Sleeping with pets wasn't just about companionship. Dogs were living, breathing heaters. A medium-sized dog produces about as much warmth as a small heating pad, and medieval people weren't too proud to take advantage of that free body heat. Cats worked too, though they had this annoying habit of wandering off right when you needed them most. The really interesting part is how sleep schedules completely revolved around temperature. Modern people stay up late watching screens, but medieval folks? They hit the hay the moment darkness fell. Why waste precious fuel on lighting when you could burrow under blankets instead? Plus, the coldest part of night happens around 3 or 4 a.m., so going to bed early meant sleeping through the worst of it. Rising at dawn wasn't just about being productive, it was survival strategy. Mornings were actually warmer inside than late nights because stone walls and floors had been absorbing whatever heat the day provided. Bodies also generate more warmth when moving around, so getting up and starting daily activities helped chase away that bone-deep chill. But here's the weird part. Many people didn't sleep straight through the night like we try to do now. They'd have what historians call first sleep and second sleep, with a wakeful period in between. During that middle-of-the-night wake time, they'd often add more layers, stoke fires, or even do light work before diving back under the covers. The whole system sounds exhausting, right? Yet somehow people survived winters that would send modern folks running for the thermostat. Their secret wasn't just one trick. It was combining every possible method to trap, create, and conserve heat. These medieval sleep strategies reveal just how resourceful humans can be when comfort isn't guaranteed. only earned through preparation and clever thinking.